Right, well, I'm going to start, if everybody can hear me. I'm going to, with Tom here, I'm going to tell you about a project that we've been working on for the last 12 months, something like that, which this actually has been a good moment to bring it to focus and to conclude it. And that project is this, it's the AA Low Carbon Project. And it started with a conversation about a year ago about whether we should have a grasp of the AA's carbon footprint. Cian has been telling you all in amazing detail what we mean by carbon footprints, but it was clear that we didn't even know our own. And so what's been happening in the last 9 to 12 months is to try and answer that question. And what I'm presenting it through this evening is the interactive website that we've built in order not just to explain it, but also to hopefully initiate a conversation, a longer term conversation around this subject with respect to the AA. So straight off the top, the AA has a carbon footprint of 9,161 tons of CO2e, as Cian said, per annum. Now, I'll tell you about the number, as I'm going to explain through the website, and then Tom's going to tell you in more detail what we might do about that number. But just, I suppose it's nice to know why we would even want to know what the AA carbon footprint is. And I think there's three things that obviously are important. One is that we would very much like to emit less carbon as an institution. And it's very important to say that is one of the purposes. Can we reduce that number? So that's aim one. Aim two is, I think, this is an institution of learning. And we hope that the process of disseminating this data will be actually hugely helpful in a pedagogic direction around some of these subjects. And we hope that when I explain it to you, you'll all see different things which you might latch onto within your learning, if you're a student, or within your teaching, if you're a tutor. And thirdly, we really would love that the AA could lead in this subject in a way that we start to be the people look toward as to how one might start to talk about carbon in our own institution and then in the buildings we make. And that's the big issue, is that we, of course, all go to produce architecture. So the lessons we hopefully learn from this will apply to the whole career that follows. So the website is organized as an interactive website. And it's very simple. You've lots of blue buttons. And we've classified all the information according to departments of the AA and different units. So as you can see this playing through, it's divided up into first year foundation, the intermediate program, diploma program, the postgraduate teaching program, visiting school, the graduation ceremony is a big one, I'll tell you about in a minute, and all the departments which go to the running of the school. Now, the way we've done it is kind of like a tree. So as you click on things, they expand and they give you insights, I suppose, into all the different people who ultimately, cumulatively contribute to making that big number. So, for instance, if I was to click in on the catering department, we know now that obviously food is a big component of their emissions, together with other things you would imagine, like the gas and the electricity they consume to run the kitchens, which feeds us. If you click on a different node, maybe we looked at the DPL, Angel's Wonderland of Machinery. Obviously, the emissions that relate to that are very much biased towards the electricity that is consumed by all the machines we use to make our models. And these lesser classifications like travel, we've quantified those too, but the proportionality is clear. And so we've done this for absolutely everybody in a kind of a slightly obsessive way to understand where to allocate all these figures between different departments, between different units, between different everybody. And the picture is very different because everything that happens the A is very different. And what's important in looking at these is that the number of people in different units or different years is different, the activities are different, and so that in turn impacts the kind of the emissions that come out. Now, overall, the diagram is quite extensive, and it's an interactive one, so it gives you the opportunity to explore that data step by step and really to go to where you're interested in. And I think, in a way, it is important to think about proportionality. Although we've chosen how to break the data down. I think the main message is one that Cian was talking to, this idea of how does one scale relate to the other scale, I think becomes incredibly clear when you see the journey from the big to the small. Now, one of the problems when you do something like this is how do you visualize? So again, Cian was telling you about these metrics of the ball, from the golf ball to the Shard to half of London. For this exercise, we decided that the metric we were going to use is Hook Park. And we did that because Hook Park, we've all been there, we've all spent time there. And it's also knowable in the way that we can be fairly specific about the number of trees. There's 89,000 trees in Hook Park. We know their size. We can estimate the amount of carbon they sequester in one given year. And so what we've done throughout this website is that as you move through from the high to the low, we've always given you the equivalent area of Hook Park, which would be required to sequester an equivalent amount of carbon in 1 year. And I think that really helped me, I have to say, visualize some of these. And I think hopefully it'll help you guys also put some kind of metrics on this. And it is important to say that it's not just any old tree, it's these trees. We've been very lucky. Jez and his team down in Hook Park have been incredibly helpful in helping us build up a picture of what that number might be. And I think it's super interesting, and we're super unique as to have this forest at our disposal to do that. Now, I have to say, one thing that I should point out is that we've given you the capacity, and Tom will talk about this, to change things in this. So for instance, at this, you can see I'm slowly increasing the size of Hook Park and doubling basically the number of trees. And in so doing, I'm also doubling the amount of carbon that's sequestered. But you might also notice in the top left, there's a little kind of mathematical sum showing the total and showing the amount sequestered. We don't take those two numbers from each other. We cannot deduct one from the other. And that's because, as Cian said, is that even if I were to plant another Hook Park beside Hook Park, it would take many, many years before that carbon would actually be drawn down from the atmosphere. Now, a couple of caveats. So one of the things we had to decide when we did this was when are we doing it? And we started this in a year ago, so 2022. And at that point, the AA was still coming out of COVID in terms of the kind of the legacy of COVID. Home working, remote teaching, all of these things, travel wasn't quite the same. So we had to take a decision very early on that, in fact, the period we would take was 2018 to 2019. That was the last set of complete data we had, which reflects kind of business as usual. So all of the numbers that we're saying are from that period of data. And I should note that from then to now, things have changed a little bit. Lots has stayed the same. The biggest change is actually we've got bigger. We were about 800 people then. We're now closer to 1,200 people. So all of the emissions, which we'll be telling you about in a minute, which relate to number of students, they will all have expanded more or less by that proportion. But in order to give a robust set of data, we've picked this year. And this year, I suppose, is what's depicted on the website. Now, when we started doing this, this is beyond me, I have to say, and my colleagues in the AALC team. Tom very bravely picked up the phone to Mike Berners-Lee, who is author of this amazing book, How Bad Are Bananas? And is basically runs Small World Consulting, who have done equivalent exercise for many leading institutions to help them understand the footprint. And so we said, would you like to come to the AA and help us figure out ours? And he said he would. And he did this incredibly interesting approach, which was, they call it an environmentally extended input-output analysis. Now this is, it just so happened one of the teams had incredible numerical ability to do this. So she worked together with Sarah. And what they did was they basically took 1 year of everything the AA ever bought. Everything from bottles of water to kilowatt hours for the lights to carpet tiles, whatever. Everything the AA bought in that period, they worked it backwards to an amount of carbon. And that was an extraordinarily exhaustive period or process, because they had to go through this immensely long list to arrive at a figure which was derived from all those purchases. So, for instance, if I was to look, again, go down to the departments, and I was just to randomly pick one, administration, and go down to cleaning. Cleaning, health and safety, 73 tons. That figure was arrived at by simply quantifying all the cleaning products and health and safety expenditure in 1 year by amount of carbon, which is knowledge that Small World have built up through many different sources they have, to arrive at that figure. And that gives us a really good insight of how we get to carbon. However, there's things that the AA didn't buy that are still owned by the AA in terms of carbon. And that included things like commuting, things like digital storage, people's hard drives where you store your data. You buy gigabytes from Dropbox. It included people working on AA stuff at home, or, for instance, the materials you buy in the model shop, or that you buy outside the model shop, say 4D model shop. And it also included big things like people's journey from where they come from to the AA and back again for term time travel. And of course, it included things like unit trips. So in order to flesh out the data, we did a very exhaustive tour around every unit and every department around May and June last year. I think about 500 people, 550 staff and students. And we were able to, from that survey, get a lot of very good information about how people did those things. And we were able to then extrapolate for the people we didn't survey and then normalize that all back to the 2018, 2019 data. And thank you everybody for helping us do that, because it was incredibly instructive. The third data source was, we had another consultant called GreenGauge, and they came in and did an incredibly detailed analysis of the buildings which we occupy. They looked at historic electrical and gas data. They had information from the SED program, which was hugely useful. They measured things, they surveyed things, and they arrived at, again, very specific information about how these buildings use energy. And so, again, if you look at one particular unit, in this case the diploma program, we've been able to isolate that amount of data with respect to the energy just on the spaces occupied by diploma units. So I'll finish in a minute, I'll give to Tom, but just I want to finish on one point, which is to say that it is important to be transparent. We've tried to be very transparent in this process, and on the website all the data that was produced is available. The reports of both consultants, Small World and GreenGauge is there, as is all the assumptions. But it's also important to know where we sit relative to other places. The AA is at School of Architecture. How do other schools of architecture compare to us? And Charlotte, thank you very much, did some great research over the summer to try and answer that question. And what comes out is that it's very hard to compare accurately different institutions. Different institutions have different sizes. Different institutions have different ambitions. Some of them, like Cian says, don't tell you the whole picture. Some of them have different dates by which they're achieving different things. So if I say there was one thing that kind of differentiates the really good institutions from the less good, I would say it's the degree to which they are transparent about their data and transparent about their targets. And I think it's worth, and we've given all the links in this website, it's worth, in a way, exploring that. So perhaps the AA can now define its targets appropriate to its ambition. So on that subject, here's Tom.
Thank you. So after this remarkable process of gathering all this information over the year, we've got to this exciting point where we can ask, what could we change? And how do we address the inevitably unstable question of change amongst many of these topics? And we hope that the website will be a powerful catalyst for those kinds of discussions and debates. And to enable that, we've built into the site a number of sliders, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But I think, first of all, we have to look at the data also thematically. And the first really remarkable piece of information that comes out of it is how dominated the emissions are by travel-related emissions, more than 3/4 of it. And I think we expected it to be big, but I don't think we expected it to be this big. Although there is some context in the UK. The UK emissions the travel is the largest sector in the UK generally. And in fact, energy and utilities, which we maybe thought would be larger, is also in the UK now the second largest emission, with travel in the lead. And so we're left with this kind of big question about travel, which I hope will be the subject of many of our discussions. And then moving on from travel, we also have energy and utilities, IT and data, which is perhaps larger than we expected, relating to all of our digital footprints, administration, and materials. So travel subdivides into these areas, and the two largest ones, which make up 2/3 of the footprint, are the journeys that you make as students to and from the AA to your home countries, and the visiting school likewise, the students that come to the location of that school. The graduation ceremony comes up again as a large wedge, and then unit trips, commuting, and other aspects of travel. Oops. So, like as I was saying on the website, this is an animation. No, I'll go back one, sorry. Let's see that one. Yeah, so we built into the website, if it will run. Let's try that. I think that'll work. There we go. Okay, so you come into the intermediate program, and you can go to some of these circles which are proportionate to the area relating to the size of the emissions, and you can drag that slider down to see what would be the effect on traveling differently, traveling less, using different modes of transport, or perhaps selecting flights that have lower emissions than others. And you can do that for a number of nodes across the site. And then the second way in which you can visualize travel is you come up to the menu bar at the top and go to the how can we lower the emissions? And you'll see some scenarios that we've preset where all of these sliders exist. And if you click on scenario 3, it will lower all of the homebound travel to 0. And now you can see a rather different picture of the AA's emissions, where 2/3 of it has gone. And I think that's a really powerful open question for us about how do we think about travel, whose responsibility it is, what's individual, what's organizational. And having looked at other architecture schools around the world, we noticed that many decide not to publish data on travel to and from home. We've chosen to put it in because I think it's important to see it and talk about it. And there are a couple of examples like EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland, that also do that and engage with it. Okay, so the second section is energy, gas and electricity that we use in our buildings for heating, cooling, lighting, and the machines. And it's not working. So you can go to the website and you can go to any of the departments. Pardon me. There we go. You can go into any of the programs and you can find the energy area, and you can look at the effects of retrofitting that portion of the building, that unit space or that studio, for the diploma school or for the intermediate school and so on. And you can look at another way we programmed retrofit is through the facilities node and the properties node. We've put in the effects of changing the gas boilers over to heat pumps or installing photovoltaic panels on the AA rooftops. And there's a preset for that also, where you can look at scenario 2, which shows all of the top-down changes made to the building fabric and energy systems. And I think it's quite surprising, certainly to us, that that net value came in at only 4% of the total of the emissions of the AA. We expected that to be higher. And I think it's really because the amount of travel is skewing the numbers so significantly that other aspects of the footprint don't seem perhaps so important. So we've also, in this diagram, taken out travel, as some institutions do, and then we see perhaps have a slightly different, more balanced picture of the other kind of key elements of the emissions footprint. So I hope we'll try and keep this presentation quite short, and we'll leave time for a panel discussion. And the idea being that you can help us to generate the new ideas that we need to bring to ourselves individually, and the kind of actions that we could take, and organizationally that the AA could take. And that between that individual and the organization, we can find some really powerful ideas about change. And if you want to go into more detail about the retrofit part, you'll find on the website there are links to the Green Gauge report, which goes into a lot more detail on that area. The next part is information technology. You've probably all received an email at one time or another that said in the footer, respect the environment, don't print this email unless you have to. I think we're going to have to change that footer, because it really needs to read, don't save this email for eternity in a data storage center. It turns out that we store a massive amount of data, and that footprint is almost of the same size and order of magnitude as the way in which we think about the buildings and the energy and gas that we use. We don't see it so obviously, but we know about these data centers. And that's an area that I think we can also start to have some interesting discussions and find out more about. In the website, you can go to the data storage, and you can look at the effect of changing that slider on the emissions of the AA as a whole. And we can start to have ask questions about how should we individually and as an organization think about how we manage data. Are there things, can we find better suppliers of data storage, or perhaps we should do more things in-house? Next, administration, which is an area that we also surveyed, but we haven't put any sliders into the website for it. It's issues to do with banking and property management, professional services. And it may not be, at least I haven't thought of any individual actions related, but I think as an organization, there are always choices about the kinds of businesses, banks, and professional organizations that you engage with and spend money on. Materials we're perhaps more familiar with, and we found that about half of materials come from external purchases by students, and the other half from the AA. We can see how they break down in terms of different types. And there's a slider for materials in each of the programs where you can look at the effects of not buying new materials, but instead finding a reclaimed or reused source, such as the material arcade. And again, we can talk about what kind of individual actions or organizational actions we can start to potentially implement at the AA. Hook Park, Giles has mentioned, and there's a slider and a preset that you can explore for that. And I'm sure there are actions that we can discuss related to Hook Park. Perhaps the way in which we manage the woodland could be considered. What do we do with timber that's cut down? Should we be using wood chip boilers? Are there better options, both organizationally and individually, that we might consider? And there's one last scenario that you'll find on the menu bar, which is about bottom-up. Scenario 1, bottom-up actions, which is really to illustrate, I think, the point that we shouldn't ever feel that this issue is too much for us as individuals to tackle. The fact is that anything that we do adds up significantly, and perhaps there's more things that we could do cumulatively together than there are that we could do at an organizational level, although obviously both are important. So briefly, when we talk about what we might change, I think inevitably we think about what are we going to have to sacrifice, and perhaps that's the first thing that comes to mind, and that's an uncomfortable kind of discussion to have. And although I think we do need those ideas, we also should be thinking about other kinds of solutions, easy wins. Perhaps there are ways of reducing emissions, but actually making no change to the way in which we run the school. Perhaps there's a lower carbon source of steel, for example, for the workshop. And equally, I hope with this process of generating ideas together, we might find win-wins, ways in which we can reduce emissions, but actually bring a net benefit to the school and the way in which we teach and learn together. And to do that, we have to talk not just about carbon. In a way, the assessment was quite simple. It was only ever about carbon. But if we're going to make a change, it also brings into play all the other things that we value. You know, what is for somebody some idea that feels like a win-win might be to somebody else a sacrifice, and we have to have quite robust discussions about what are the other values of the AA and how do we evaluate that through the lens of carbon. How do we bring a balance between emissions and other things that are important to us? And that perhaps adds a fourth category, what I've called better losses, that there may be ways in which we choose not to or can't lower emissions for some element, but can we at least then get as much value out of that a process or product and not have any kind of wastefulness in our approach. So we've come a long way, but we're really actually just getting to the kind of starting line of this process of gathering ideas about the AA and its carbon footprint. So I hope you'll use the website to help us do that. And then as we move through the next academic year, I hope we'll have a chance to assess those ideas, think about their carbon impact, their value to other aspects of teaching and learning, and of course their feasibility in relationship to cost and complexity. And then we'll move on to an implementation stage and start to chart pathways to lower carbon scenarios, and perhaps, like other institutions, make some declarations about where we want to be by when, and reassess how we're doing along the way. So we're launching the website today. You might have already spotted it on the screen in next door. And one of the things I hope you'll do, as well as interacting with it, looking at the numbers, changing the sliders, most importantly, please look for that share an idea button. You'll find it on every single node in the website. So you can click there and share an idea with us about something you think could happen at the AA. You can leave it on a specific node related to that one thing, or you can leave it in the main AA node about a more general idea. And without further ado, here's the website.
Thank you. That was amazing. Hello, everyone. First of all, big congratulations. It's a monumental piece of work, and it's very impressively done. I'm not sure if everyone in the room understands how big this is. And I think it's also important to say that in the future, I don't know if it's going to be a decade or 4 decades, but you will be looking back on today and saying, oh, I remember when this was coming into vogue. You know, we didn't monitor these things before, right? To find a language, to find this vocabulary of how we're monitoring this, how we're defining it, how we're presenting it, and what we're doing about it, I think is very big. So I think it's a big success. And I think it also blows open a whole wide series of questions, which I'm really hoping that you guys in the audience and beyond engage with. I think you guys need to be looking at this website, and perhaps you guys have better ideas, or you start thinking about things that haven't been thought of before. I mean, we are in a brand new cultural landscape, and I think there are big questions. For example, AI is becoming very important and prominent in the design field and within the school. And with that comes also a carbon footprint and a water footprint, right? But also some of the knowledge that we learn from there might help us be more sustainable, more efficient, find more effective design strategies, for example. So it's a complicated metric situation, and we are all co-authors of it. So I'm very curious, so please don't be shy. There are no stupid questions. But I think I'm just going to start off saying, okay, 2 questions. What do you feel are the priorities moving forward? I mean, I know transport is a big one. We have a lot of international students at the school and staff, you know, asking people to not see their families for a few years while they're studying is a big ask. But maybe that's the biggest priority for you. Are you able to kind of break this down, or do you think it's a bit more of a plural hybrid approach?
I think the most important thing that comes out of this is the attitude of positivity, that rather than thinking about these things, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, you say, oh, but I could do this. Ingrid had this lovely thing. She said, it's a pity she's not here, but she said the joy of renting a house in Dorset and having a week vacation with your friends in Dorset as an amazing way to spend a week. To be a possible way to think about like an option that is lower carbon than maybe, I don't know, going somewhere without your friends, and yet having many other benefits to it attached. So I think that's a kind of a really nice example, I thought, of how do you make something really joyful rather than something really painful. And I think that is the challenge here, is to try and find joyful outcomes out of this that don't feel painful. That would be my one.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that also it's about reducing emissions, yes, but also about increasing all of our kind of collective literacy, understanding, awareness, and skill sets. And I hope that will also be a catalyst for that, because as Giles mentioned, and also in Kian's talk, the kinds of impacts that we can have through our work, whatever aspects of the kind of profession or built environment, there's an opportunity to make really enormous impacts through not just what we do today or this year, but to think perhaps we have to have a life cycle analysis of ourselves and everything we might contribute from now onwards.
We're going down the road. Yeah, I think this is just the beginning, and the quantification was really, really important, but actually the process of going into all of the units, having all of these conversations, that dialogue, it's just starting. I came into it with a particular focus on retrofit and the building itself. I know travel became a massive thing, but not just the gathering of the numbers, as Tom was saying. It's not just about carbon, but what about comfort? What about emissions and air quality if we could get rid of these massive boilers that we've got in the basement? And to do a good retrofit, you need to really, really know your building. The chances of the AA coming in and saying, we'll make the whole building passive house inhabit in one swoop is highly unlikely. But through not just the report that Greengage did, but the conversations we had with people in different spaces, we know where windows are jammed open. We know where radiators are set to 25 and they could be set to 21 or 19. We know where, if we just put in some controls, people could change that themselves rather than feeling out of control and it's in the basement. So that's an education process that's only just starting, and there are very quick wins that will make us more comfortable and reduce our carbon quite quickly. And then, there's so much creative opportunity to think about how we start to retrofit the school, how we start to insulate the school, that we can all get involved in. And that piece I'm really excited about.
You guys have said most of it. So I guess I don't have very much. But I think that I think that's what design is. Design is accepting the situation and then working out ways to innovate. And that's what postmodernism is. There was not enough hand skills, but there's suddenly concrete around, and we're going to make all these, we're going to innovate, and we're going to create all these amazing things. Now we look back and maybe it was very carbon intensive, but it's still that situation. So this leads to thinking about things like if we need trips to the United States, do we need to allow a week to sail there, a week to be there, and a week to sail back? Do we, the way that we reduce the need to fly home? I'm not going to argue for that, but is part of it that we don't have. Imagine if we owned Bedford Square. Imagine if all your friends were working and living in Bedford Square. Would you really want to feel a need to go home when you could stay here and you could enjoy London and this amazing square that the AA owns? So I think it's about we don't get mad. Sometimes we get mad about gravity, but we accept it and we design with gravity. And I think that's one of the things that we have to do in this scenario is we take this as an amazing opportunity to be creative.
Before I continue with my questions, going out into the crowd, is there anybody that wants to respond directly to any of those points or have any questions?
I want to ask something. I find the travel thing quite shocking, 75%, it's super shocking. But there are also a lot of part-time teachers and academic staff who either weekly or bi-weekly travel. And I was wondering, I didn't get the chance to look at it there, but is there a distinction between students who go back home and like, have you kind of calculated those two data differently?
I mean, the answer is yeah. I mean, the methodology was we established where people were traveling and the way they traveled. And then Small World have multipliers which are kind of as the crow flies. And a lot of the, I mean, I don't know the nuances, but a lot of the difference between local flights versus high altitude flights have big impacts on carbon emissions. All the students, all the tutors that we did survey were included, and then we obviously had to extrapolate on all the ones we didn't do. So I think we saw 550 students in a school of 1,200. I think it was a pretty robust survey in terms of the habits, but yeah, I mean, I think there's no holes of size in it.
Yeah, because I mean, what do you think are some of the ways that we can directly tackle this? Like traveling less for international students to like, it's not like, maybe it's not the most, like, it's quite ambitious to.
But there are some really easy wins. I mean, the big one, knowing how you travel and knowing that the choice of airplane and airline could be up to 30% in terms of the emission is kind of, and there's a really lovely link there I really hope you find. Just knowing that, it's like, wow, I didn't know that was an option I had. So those kind of things, a unit trip is a good example. Knowing that a unit trip has a project in the destination, I think is perhaps just quite sensible. Knowing that there's value in that emission. And I think those kind of ability to kind of make a judgment around those issues is really the thing. I don't think anyone's saying everyone lives somewhere else. It's a question of, necessity. So I don't think there's, and the only reason we've given the option on the website to remove it is because there are conversations. I mean, the Bartlett's having a really interesting conversation at the moment. Should this be in or out? And they took it out of their footprint, but there's umpteen papers about why it should be in. And so I think we need to have a position on that as well.
Maybe one of the ways that we can move forward, I would like to get your opinions on this, is to come up with either like a big poster or some sort of visual data that gives what is the best flight or the best airline and the best type of plane that I can take from London to Lisbon, London to Istanbul. So you have it? Okay. Okay, then we need to print it big and hang it and show it to everyone.
I think there was a question in the back. Oh.
Thank you very much for the work that you've done. It's fantastic, right? One thing that concerns me is that the AA is a place where people come for 5, 6, 7 years, And it's the experience and the knowledge and what they get out of it, which is most important, okay? So I think that I support exactly what you're actually doing. Let's see how we can do it. But I would like to add one more thing in here, and that is that the paramount importance of seeing that the most important thing is what the students get out of this place. So if we create a seedbed of people who understand what we are after and what we can do with our designs, and they go back all over the world, then I would like to factor that into the travel. Because of course you could say, yes, well, we could become a completely insular sort of thing. We will reduce our carbon footprint with the travel, but they're not really influencing the whole world. So I think that this is something that I like to add on to that. The most important thing is the 5, 6, 7 years that we're here, that will really get this sort of values into our system and then influence the world. Because many of the things that we were seeing with Kian, well, I mean, each one of you, I mean, can you imagine, where you can be in the whole world and the influence you can have? So I think that I'd like to add that into the question.
I agree with what Javier says. And I think this is this scale thing that I was trying to show you before, is that the carbon footprint that we have is 9 kilotons. And I said, if you go from a really bad project, UK project, to a really good project, that's 2 gigatons. Was it gigatons or kilotons? Megatons? No, it was megatons. It was either megatons or kilotons. I can't remember. But anyway, you're basically operating at the same scale or more than the whole of the AA. So if we, and that's the process. If we were to say that every single student who left the AA was able to take a project and save 2 kilotons, then, and that's 1,200 students, that's a huge amount. I would say that justifies. You go to a place and then you go back and you save thousands and thousands of megatons of carbon, then that's the kind of change that we need in the world. So I think it's about that, and we need to then, and like you said, we need to have that in our values then.
But what would happen if the AA didn't have Climate Week and didn't teach about sustainability, and those 1,200 students flew all that way to not learn about the ways to be more sustainable? So I think it's an important question, but it's a dangerous question, because I don't think we should be totally linking, and it's not a trade-off between how much is our knowledge, appreciation, or education worth in terms of carbon. I think with these decisions that we're making, we need to ensure that we embed these kind of sustainability principles in every layer and start making wiser decisions. So we can't just sit there and say, no, we fly all over the place and we go the road because it's worth it for knowledge. It's great that we're doing this. I've spent years traveling, and that's been totally important for me developing my own ideas, and I wouldn't take that away for anything. But it's important that now we're starting to ask these questions and learn about that and realize that this is an important integral part of what architecture of tomorrow means. And I think it's also really important that you include it, and it's very brave. It's very brave. So there's a lot of greenwashing, which Kian was talking about earlier, about how you present your net zero building, even though you've carbon offset 98% of it, and you just paid it off and you don't even know if that's actually gone through something, right? So, or actually presenting things for how they are, warts and all, which is what you guys did. And it also slightly derails a little bit of the language, because we're talking about transport, and then we're automatically going, yeah, but what about going home and better flights? And actually, there's also other things that we can be doing. I mean, just you guys sitting here, I'm hoping that you're going to take away these kinds of nuggets of information, actually start thinking about, are there better ways of transport, or are you going to be doing things? I mean, these small steps. I mean, out of curiosity, does anybody know their personal carbon footprint in the last year? One person. Does anybody know whether or not their carbon footprint this year is more than it was last year? Does anybody know whether or not their carbon footprint is going to be less next year than this year? We can't know this right now because we don't have this grammar or language to identify it and to measure it, which is what the school is doing right now. So hopefully next year we'll be performing far better than we are in 2018. And I think that's the point of this exercise. Was that a question over there? Do you want to, does someone? Oh, sorry, you're coming after.
While it's traveling, can I just add one little piece, which is that we did have this conversation with Small World specifically about and Mike and Sarah were really interested in the conversation about how do we then measure that impact. So there was a conversation around, but students are traveling, and in theory, yes, we're teaching sustainability really well, and they'll go across the world. And I've definitely had students who I've spoken to who've said, where should I go now? I'm really into sustainability. Where in the world is doing this stuff? No one's doing it where I've come from. And I said, well, then go there. But when we had this conversation with Small World, we got a bit stuck because even they, with all of their measuring skills, didn't know, did they, how to quantify it. So it's not that it's not part of the conversation, but I think it demonstrated how difficult it was as a question to answer. And your responses, but we are we guaranteeing that we're teaching we're all teaching different things. So maybe the question is, learning outcomes, and it's all part of guaranteeing what we exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, going back to the subject of travel and students and teachers and all that, I think that you can't take it out of that number. And I think that students and teachers need to find the solution through that constraint, i.e. not to just ignore it and just say, oh, wow, but we'll do an amazing project which is going to have an impact elsewhere, but actually to work through the limitations. And I think that, I did my personal carbon footprint I think 2 or 3 years in a row. And you can see, of course, the biggest impact is flying. That's a bit like trying to be sustainable in using concrete and then trying to be sustainable in flying. You can't. That's as simple as that. The office I work, we have a climate perk scheme. So it gives you time off to kind of go by rail to perhaps a holiday destination or home. And it gives you time off. And it's painful, but then you have to kind of work through it and accept this as part of your design and your solution. You're designing your own life as well as teaching what to do with the future. So you have to address it. I fundamentally have to address that, of course. The travel, because you can't bring these huge carbon numbers down if you just basically say, oh, wow, but yeah, we'll come up with good ideas that's going to have a good impact one day.
Excellent point, I think. At least I totally agree with it. The lady in the back with the beautiful necklace.
I love this anonymous persona I now have in the lecture hall that never gets to happen. I guess I wanted to start by just saying how amazing I think this is as a resource. I just think the amount of information that's there and also the options to enable us to have broader conversations on how we reduce our footprint is really amazing. It's really incredible. And I think we learned a lot during the pandemic out of necessity. I think our carbon footprint has shrunk considerably because we no longer require every single student applying to the school to fly here for an interview. We do all of those online, which definitely wasn't the case pre-pandemic. And I feel like sometimes we don't actually look at how much we've actually evolved in this time. I think in my own role through the public program, I think we had to do the whole public program online for a long time, and obviously there's a real joy in being in a room all together to get to talk about things. But for example, we're doing a symposium in a few weeks' time that's about the future of rural thinking and design in Japan, and we're only flying out one person for that. A, because we can't afford to fly out more, but B, because it doesn't make sense to fly out someone to speak for 20 minutes. They can actually do it really well on Zoom. And similarly, the day before, there's 3 people joining from America online. And I think I think the pandemic just made us think more strategically, and we also have really great ways in which people can participate for shorter engagements really well. And even with exhibitions, the whole exhibition in the gallery is materials from Projects Review that we've reused. But I'm just wondering how that stuff can continue to be documented through this resource, and how we had these conversations with each of you at varying points in the year, and obviously there's certain years that this data is reflective of, but I'm just wondering how this will evolve going forward, and how that it doesn't take a Climate Matters Week to maybe for us to, whether it's something more regular that we have to be thinking about and reflecting on as a school, and making sure that everyone's aware of these amazing resources that exist on this website, like how to fly better, etc.
I think this is a really important point because obviously it's going to be very, very topical right now. So we're going to have a little bit of traction, and then all of a sudden in 3 weeks' time, you guys are going to have a deadline and forget about all of this, which is normal. And then it's Christmas, and then it's break, and then it's whatever. And so how to kind of really embed this into the practices? I think it's really important that this is crowdsourced information. Your ideas. I mean, you guys are the institution. Like it's not. There are, the bricks and the stone and the windows and the materials, which is one question, and the plastic water bottles and all the catering and stuff. But then, the main part is kind of your guys' action and what you guys think is a good idea. And I really think that there should be a space. I mean, you have it, this kind of click, and there's like ideas, but actually documenting it. And I think the real change will be if the people who design the programs embed climate literacy in every element of the programs, that you guys have to design buildings with a low embodied carbon marker, for example, or what is a cross comparison of these things to actually develop your own language and your own grammar. But yeah, I think it's a big question of how you keep this momentum and continuity and actually really embed this so it's not just a one-off climate week exercise.
Thanks, Manoj. It's been really a big pleasure also to get to know many staff and students and find out these things that have been happening. And we have tried to put a level of detail into the website where you can find out the kinds of things that are already happening. And also how much everybody cares about it, or many people, not everybody perhaps. But, talking to Pascal about his thinking around what he's been doing in catering or in any one of the departments of the school, it also operates at this personal level of engagement between each other. And I think that's a really important resource about how we communicate together and discover the things that have been done. And it's often quite freeing to find out, someone will say, I've been wanting to do that for years, and now this is an opportunity to take that step.
We have a question back here. Do we have a microphone? Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you that have you factored in the carbon footprint of doing the analysis into your total carbon footprint? And apart from that, also the carbon footprint in making the website and maintaining it. So.
Who wants that one?
Okay, so we did talk about this. There is a thing called a low carbon website, and the Design Museum has toyed with this, having a low carbon version and a normal carbon version. And we wanted to have both of those for ours. We haven't managed to do that yet. So it is on our to-do list. And then in terms of factoring in the carbon associated with our actual carbon footprinting exercise, we didn't, but we think there was so many other factors to get involved in this first one. I think it's something that we could do for our next one, but we haven't managed to do for this one. Yeah. Who else?
I'm curious about what was the most difficult metric to measure for this year's survey, and what kind of metric do you guys plan to add to the next year's survey?
Actually, materials is really tough. Materials is genuinely very tough. This is an interesting one because it's whether and how important it is. But materials is really difficult because timber doesn't come from the same place around the world. Plaster doesn't come from the same place around the world. So having a number that represents one material is nuts. And so that's a really difficult thing to do. In the greater scheme of things, it's not the largest one. It's not, but it was still a hard thing for us to kind of get together with. And then one of the things that we wanted to explore more of is printing. The carbon cost of printing things versus reviewing work digitally. It's a big part of what we do is in a teaching context is the assessment of work, and we really want to know which way is the better way to go with that. Anything else?
It was really hard measuring a lot of students work from home and in different types of buildings, and I think that the typologies that we gave were quite limited, really. But I mean, it's a relatively small ratio of what we were doing. So yeah, if you dig into those numbers, I think that was really difficult. And then asking people to say how many hours a week do you work from home, and yeah.
I have to say, it kept getting bigger. I mean, I don't know, about 4 months ago, we were at a number, and Smallman said, right, okay, good, we've figured out your footprint. And then there was a bit, but what about? And somebody said, but what about, you know, all this, I don't know, drop boxes? Oh, goodness, that's a big one. We better add that to the list. And suddenly, I think, actually, that kind of idea of scope and what's in and what's out, and also what kind of the ratio, the proportionality of these things is just totally unexpected, you know. And I think knowing that actually we drew a line, and maybe there were other lines we could have drawn, you know, beyond that line or before that line, I think makes it the exercise of a footprint kind of quite awe-inspiring, I have to say. I mean, it has been, the word Misway, who worked so hard on this, used was eye-opening. And my eyes have been opened, I have to say, by just the level of kind of, the level of data that can kind of come out from all places that I look. You know, I look in the toilets, I look in the kitchens, I look in the windows. Everything is perhaps describable in these terms. And I think that's, in one hand, overwhelming, but the other hand, kind of like, wow, there's so much opportunity within each of these things to do something or to think about something.
They call it system complete.
Yeah.
System complete is the phrase that they like to use in carbon accounting when you've got absolutely everything encompassed in your circle. I'm never quite sure how we know we've got to system complete, but it's a nice concept. Joanna?
Okay. Yeah, I have a question. Thank you guys for the work and the presentation and the website. It's great to see all this coming alive. I'm trying to be quick and clear. My point is about the big pie chart. I think Giles mentioned that we could take the trips or the travel out and see without the travel, or we have this possibility, yeah? I don't know if I arrived late, if you did show and I didn't see, or if we didn't see without the travel. Because my point is about the buildings and the people. Okay, so that's the pie chart without. So we have energy. I just wanted to see and also hear from you, what do you think? When we take the travel out and we look at the here and now, we in the AA together every day, or almost every day for the whole year, what is happening? How much the buildings or our occupation in the buildings is accounting for emissions? And Sal mentioned a few strategic actions for retrofit. And my question is, have we done it already, or is it going to be any further study, in case we haven't, about how occupants are affecting that energy demand and that, therefore, the emissions? Meaning, of course, we need to change boilers. We know we need to insulate better. But we can also learn how to operate our windows, our blinds, what are comfortable temperatures, what are acceptable temperatures, how can we adapt to warmer conditions, adapt to cooler conditions, given the impact that we know that this kind of adaptive opportunities and actions have in buildings. And globally, the buildings are 40% of the primary energy. So maybe in the whole AA and the lifestyle of the AA, they don't seem so big, but we know that globally they are. And then also, sorry, another question. Do we know how do we score against, or within the big building sector, how far are we from a performance that we should expect or consider as good?
I was quite surprised that the figure for the kilowatt hours per year for these buildings compared to a building of this generation, which would be around 200 kilowatt hours, and we were more like 150. I'm amazed by that, actually. But it's not. It could be worse.
We have an energy rating of D as well, which isn't bad.
That's really impressive. Yeah, we have an energy rating of D. So there are, but that's potentially because it's averaged over quite a wide range of buildings, and I don't believe it for quite a few of the spaces. And what's come out through the survey, and I have the same question for you, really, for all of us, about what are the next steps. It's been very clear which spaces around the AA are less comfortable, are very, very cold in the winter and very, very hot in the summer. So maybe that's where we start. Also, the data that Green Gauge were working with, we don't have, the sub-metering means it's very difficult to actually get the right figures to extrapolate the space heating demand of the different spaces because it's not sub-metered. So that might be a first step, but who decides when? And
I was also going to shout out Material Arcade, who saved through their taking in of material that students have used in their models, deconstructing it, making it available, giving it out. So basically saving material from being wasted and also saving new material from being made, saved about 0.5 ton of carbon just through that. And so I think that's the material segment of this pie chart, which I thought was amazing. So I think that is definitely one that could be expanded further.
I wasn't involved in this, but I am going to add that from my understanding, the student body has grown by 1/3 in a couple of years, and we give off heat. There's a brilliant project by is it Baumschlager Eberleer? And they did a 22-26 where they did a project that used no heating, no air conditioning, and actually used the internal gains of the building. So the fact that there's more bodies in here, more activities, we generate heat, and actually that should reduce a lot of the heating load. So that's an example of how you do that. You can also divide the carbon emitted per person, and then there's less per pupil. So I mean, there's all different ways that you can manipulate this, but I think you kind of have to just go for practical. Practical solutions as well, because you guys also know. I mean, there's light bulbs here. I mean, look at them. I mean, do you know how much energy these lights use? I mean, there's quick wins, quick fixes, and I think we also talk a lot about this transformation as like a period of austerity or of loss, or it'd be a very different situation if I said we have to turn off our heating and open the windows, and you guys just have to work in your jumpers and your jackets, and you're just gonna be cold all the time. We're kind of, it's a win-win situation that many of these solutions are that I think could be really positive. That's my thought. Any more questions? Is that the proposal? Oh, sorry, I'm wrapping it up. Would anyone on the panel actually like to have any kind of closing remarks and thoughts?
Cool. Okay, so I do encourage you all to play with it, the website, and come up with ideas. If you want to know more, I would definitely go. I think actually one thing you should definitely all do. One thing you could do is go to the Design Museum's Net Zero Homes exhibition, which is free, and I definitely think that's a really useful place for you to get an idea of what to do next.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming, and I really hope that you will engage proactively with the site and with us, and that we can enjoy a process over this year and the coming years of generating really innovative ideas and learning more together about all of these topics.
Can I just have one more? I also want you guys to see this as a really big and exciting opportunity. Not all universities are doing this. And in a couple of years, you guys are going to be out in the big wide world working, and you have to build your own portfolios and your own CVs and your own language, and you need to present. And if you're not fluent in this, it's going to be a different and very tricky world to navigate. So this is a huge opportunity for you guys to kind of, become incredibly relevant and start driving the change and be the innovators and designers. So think of this as a really positive and great opportunity. Thank you.